Russell Moore compared me to a Nazi in Christianity Today because he didn't like my interpretation of a particular verse. Well, guess what? Russell Moore is wrong. Also, Kamala Harris is doing some church hopping and some sermon delivering. We will dissect that as well as respond to the whole Jesus is Lord controversy at one of her recent rallies. This episode is brought to you by our friends at Good Ranchers. Go to goodranchers.com, code Allie. That's goodranchers.com, code Allie. Hey guys, welcome to Relatable. Happy Tuesday. Hope everyone is having a wonderful week so far. If you have not watched or listened to yesterday's episode with Dr. Al Mohler, you've got to, and share it with all of your friends, your Christian friends who are thinking about not voting, who are voting third party, even maybe leaning toward voting for Kamala Harris. He does such a good job of breaking down in Christian language why this election matters, what is at stake, the significant daylight between the two party platforms. So go check out that. Super helpful to me. That is what we are going to be addressing in so many of our episodes coming up. We are getting really close to this election. In fact, it's 2 weeks from today, and I want to talk to Christians and the friends of Christians who are not interested in voting. As I talked about yesterday, George Barna found through a recent study that there are tens of millions of church-going Christians who are not voting in this election, not because of some moral position that they've taken against the two parties or two candidates, but because of a disinterest in politics. Now, that's probably not any of you who are watching this podcast, but I guarantee there are many of you out there who are friends with that kind of person. And so whether you get those people to listen to or watch this show, or whether I or my guests give you the equipment to have conversations with your friends, that's what I'm going to be addressing. I'm going to try my best in the clearest way possible to show you the difference between the two party platforms, are imperative, I think, to vote as Christian citizens of the United States. But we're also going to be talking about some of the news of the day, especially what's going on in the Christian political world, the intersection that I occupy most frequently. And today is one of those episodes. As I've said before, whenever a pastor or some kind of Christian leader starts talking about politics, it's of special interest to me, especially when they are speaking from the more progressive side of things. And certainly Russell Moore, the former president of ERLC and the editor-in-chief of Christianity Today, falls into that category. This is someone who talks about politics, but usually in pretty vague terms. And he might sometimes tickle to the left, but he surely punches right. He really doesn't like Donald Trump, and over the years he has become less and less conservative, I would say, not only politically but also theologically. This is someone who used to talk a lot about the importance of religious liberty, the importance of preserving the definition of marriage between a man and a woman, the importance of protecting the unborn. And if you just do a simple analysis of his Twitter history, where he has been pretty active over the past decade, you will see how his language and how his focus has really changed. He has stopped talking in many cases, it seems, about the importance of the sanctity of life and the definition of marriage and the reality of male and female, and has really focused on this crazy, scary specter of Christian nationalism and the threat of Donald Trump and the problems with conservative Christians and how we look at our political atmosphere. And as we will get into today, Megan Basham, through her book Shepherds for Sale, has really analyzed Russell Moore and why he has become the way he is. Although, as we will also discuss, many of his colleagues would say that this is kind of how he has always been. And I'll explain exactly why we are talking about Moore today. So let me back up. I posted on X on October 11th. I said this: the least of these, in quotations, is referring to persecuted Christians, not the poor. So I'm voting for the set of policies that will best protect the truly least of these, like Jack Phillips, like Lori Smith, other believers who have had their lives ruined by progressive activists. No chance I could vote for the party that routinely targets Christians for harassment, discrimination, and lawfare. Honestly, I didn't really foresee that post getting to the progressive side of X and stirring up a lot of anger. I am just expressing my perspective. And of course, I wouldn't expect progressives, Democrats, people on the center left, Russell Moore, to agree with my conclusion that I'm voting for Republicans because they are the party on the ballot that will best protect the religious liberty of Christians, that will be pardoning the pro-lifers who are in prison rather than imprisoning more pro-lifers, which is absolutely what Kamala Harris would do. But it did make its way to the progressive side of X, and it made people very angry, and so angry, in fact, that it even spilled over onto Instagram. There was one progressive-leaning female influencer. I guess she has a podcast, and according to those of you who have followed her for a while, she has become more progressive over time, and she posted that this tweet of mine made her physically angry. She was so mad about what I said. She said it's shoddy hermeneutics. This is a terrible interpretation. And that's what I heard from a lot of people. Interestingly, a lot of people who called me very vile names that I certainly don't find in the Bible, because I dared to suggest that the least of these is not talking about the world's poor or the world's marginalized, but is actually talking about the persecuted Christian. You'll notice I didn't say that Christians shouldn't care for the poor, because elsewhere we are given that command and, of course, that model. But this verse in particular is actually talking about the persecuted Christian. This made a lot of people mad, including Russell Moore, to the point that he actually called me and those who hold this interpretation a Nazi. So I'll get into that and respond to that criticism in just a second. Let me pause. Let me tell you about our first sponsor. It's 7 Weeks Coffee. I absolutely love 7 Weeks Coffee. They have great tasting, super high quality coffee, the highest quality that you can find. But the best part about them is that they are a coffee company that truly embodies pro-life and godly values. That's why they donate a percentage of every sale to pro-life organizations and pregnancy centers. They've donated over $500,000 to these pro-life organizations. That has translated into saving somewhere around 5,000 little baby lives as these mothers are told about life-affirming options, given the resources that they need. And so your coffee that you're already probably drinking on a daily basis can actually serve a higher purpose. You can join their Heartbeat Club. You'll get that box of coffee to your front door every month. That actually saves you 15% on your order when you subscribe. Plus, when you use my code Allie, you get an extra 10% off. So go to 7weekscoffee.com, code Allie, 7weekscoffee.com, code Allie. So let's look at this verse, Matthew 25:31 through 46. He's describing his return when the sheep will be separated from the goats, sheep being his people, goats being not his people. Verse 40, and the king will answer them, truly I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of these, my brothers, you did it to me. So after a little backlash, I posted this on X. All of these things are true. 1, the least of these are suffering, persecuted Christians. 2, Christians should help the poor. 3, Christians should not outsource our compassion to the government. Voting Democrat in the name of helping the poor is not altruistic. You will go to jail if you don't pay taxes. That is not the cheerful giving that God loves, as we read in 2 Corinthians 9:7. Because I hear a lot from Christians who are voting Democrat that they are voting for the least of these. They are voting for the most vulnerable, they're voting for the poor, and they see the Democrat Party as the party that is helping these communities that they believe Jesus is commanding us to serve in this particular verse. But I also say to that, even if this verse were talking about the world's poor, the Democrat policies that we see in their platform right now, that we actually see in place across the country, do not actually help those communities you say you're trying to help. Remember, we do not judge a policy, as Thomas Sowell has articulated, by its stated intentions. We judge a policy by its results, and we can see the results of so-called compassionate progressive policy in every blue city that exists. As cities have become more progressive, as Denver, as Pittsburgh, as DC, as Seattle, as Portland, as San Francisco, as Austin have become more progressive, they have become worse. They've become worse for the poor, worse for the homeless, worse for the middle class, worse for children, worse for the innocent people just trying to work and afford rent and to live their lives in a responsible way. They've become less safe. They've become dirtier. And so you're going to have to show me how these policies that supposedly help these vulnerable communities have worked out in an actually beneficial way. Again, don't just tell me how they could theoretically help these people, but show me tangibly how they've helped these people. And so I understand why Democrats got mad when I used their token verse to justify not voting for Democrats, but explain one reason why I am voting Republican. I did not anticipate, though, that Russell Moore would be saying that I am like a Nazi. So he wrote a post a few days after this backlash ensued online for Christianity Today titled "The Least of These and the Quest for a Post-Christian Conscience." So I guess those of us who are saying that the least of these are not the world's poor, that we're trying to have a post-Christian conscience. Now it's interesting because here's how he says this, which I just think this is dishonest. There's no way that he doesn't actually know who started this whole controversy. He writes, "A friend told me last week that some social media controversy dusted up for a bit over just this question about who the least of these is. He needn't tell me who posted it because it doesn't matter in this ephemeral medium. The players always change and the game remains the same." Anybody who's ever been a youth pastor knows that there's a certain kind of question, like how far is too far? Or actually, Jesus wasn't talking about the kind of sex I want to have. Okay, that's less about just asking questions of the text than about doing what one wants to do. So that is what he is saying. My interpretation is that I am looking for a license to sin. All right. The question raised by these sorts of actually arguments about parsing out who fits in the least of these and who does not is not a new one. It is quite literally the question Jesus answered from a lawyer seeking to parse out how he was within the bounds of love God and love your neighbor with the question, who is my neighbor? One can almost hear the equivocating. Actually, neighbor in the context of the Torah refers to those within the household of Israel. So ... And so, again, what he is saying is that my interpretation is basically like the person who is trying to say that they're a Christian without actually acting like one. He continues with this straw man, and it is a straw man because he is presupposing that I am arguing that Christians are never to care for the poor, or that the Bible never tells us to care for the poor, or that Jesus never tells us to care for the poor. That was not my argument. That is not even close to what I said. And so he makes his case that we are actually supposed to care to the poor, for the poor. Yeah, I know. That's one of the things that Christians do best. Y'all have heard my monologue about 1 million times at this point as I talk about how Christians revolutionized, how they changed the game, changed the world when they entered into the pagan world of the Roman Empire, that we changed how the world saw people, how The world saw the elderly, the poor, the woman, and especially the child and the baby. Like, that is the speech that I give most often. I am well aware that Christians are called to care for the vulnerable, as the church, by the way, again, not outsourcing that compassion to the state. But here's where he really makes his argument that my interpretation is completely out of bounds, completely outside of Christian history, and actually looks more like Nazi propaganda than it does real biblical interpretation. He says, if one is embarrassed by the miracles or morality of Jesus, one can always demythologize him with all the fervor of a 19th century German scholar. Okay, so fascist. If one is embarrassed by the compassion or empathy of Jesus, choice of words is intentional there, one can demythologize him there too with all the frenzy of a 20th century German soldier. None of that will change, not one iota, that Jesus is ultimately seated on the throne. Before him, has God really said, is a terrible question to ask. So is, who is my neighbor? And when confronted with the suffering of human beings around you, making the point that those who are suffering are less than the least of these is no argument at all. Again, this is a straw man because this is not the argument that I was making. It is really easy to tear down an argument that someone did not make, an argument that you want them to make, so that you can seem very scholarly and smart and righteous when you refute it. Gosh, that reminds me a whole lot of a particular group in Jesus's time. Who else did that kind of thing? I'm sure it'll come to me at some point. Maybe the great theologian Russell Moore can help me out on that. So what Russell Moore is saying, that because of this interpretation, as I'm about to show you, is extremely mainstream and was held by the church fathers and great theologians throughout history, including modern theologians, that because I hold that interpretation, that I am like the soldiers that put Jewish children into gas chambers. Like, I just want us to really feel the weight of his words there, because just because you are good at words, just because you are a wordsmith, doesn't mean that you can throw out comparisons to a 20th century German soldier flippantly. And now maybe he thinks that not naming me specifically means that he avoids real responsibility or any obligation to demonstrate decency, but I just want us to sit in this for a second. He just likened me, a mom of 3, trying to navigate the craziness of our culture, which with as much clarity and courage as God can give me, someone that he disagrees with politically and I guess theologically, to a soldier who placed innocent Jewish children and babies in concentration camps and starved them and murdered them and tortured them and placed them in gas chambers. That's how Russell Moore, the editor-in-chief of Christianity Today, functions, argues, disagrees with a believer. That is his MO. From his former colleagues that have reached out to me and expressed sympathy in this situation, that is how he has long operated. Passive-aggressive, catty, cutting to the bone when you threaten his own dogma. He's mad because this is the dogma that he uses to justify voting Democrat. At least that's what it seems to me. And so he will literally, if you disagree with him, call you a Nazi. That's Russell Moore. But what is the correct interpretation of this? Well, there are people much, much smarter, more knowledgeable, wiser than I am that have better answers for us than I do. So we'll dig into that in a second. Let me pause and tell you about our next sponsor. It's Preborn. This is another amazing pro-life organization. These people are the hands and feet of Jesus within the pro-life movement, because this is a network of clinics across the country that are actually serving the women who are in need, these pregnant women who are in crisis, who walk in and they're alone, they need help, they need answers. The people at preborn, they help them. They meet them where they are. They tell them the truth about the life that's inside them. They give them the tools, the resources that they need. But preborn can only do this through your donations. One of the most important things that they do is offer free ultrasounds. Those ultrasounds cost $28 a piece. So if you can donate $28, you cover the cost of an ultrasound. If you can donate $140, you are covering the cost of 5 ultrasounds. That's 5 babies that may be saved because of your donation. Go ahead and donate at preborn.com/Allie. That's preborn.com/Allie. All right, let's start with the early church fathers. And I want to give a shout out to Honest Youth Pastor. He created an Instagram post about this, and he actually originally criticized my take. But then to his credit, after he did some reading, he posted an Instagram post that showed that actually this interpretation that I articulated, that I only learned of a few years ago, I think from Nathan Finocchio on Instagram. I'd never thought about it like that. I did not know that Jesus was referring actually to his brothers, the members of the body of Christ, his own church, his own people, until just about a few years ago. So if this is new to you, I have been in the same boat pretty recently, but here's what the church fathers say. Here is Cyprian. He lived from 200 to 258 AD. This is in one of his books. He referenced Matthew 25:40 and the concept of the least of these, my brethren. He emphasizes that this is actually talking about believers. Jesus is saying, whatever you do to these believers, my children, my people, you do unto me. Augustine, he lived from 354 to 430. In Sermon 86, he said this: when he said, you did it to these, he did not say, my brethren, but he added this when he said, you did it unto me. Why? But because these were his members, because he was their head. So he sees the least of these as referring specifically to believers who are members of Christ's body. Then we've got John Calvin in the 16th century. In his commentary on Matthew, he writes, Christ does not here speak of all wretched persons without distinction, but of those who, being tried by the cross, are reckoned as his own people. Interestingly, Christianity Today, you'll remember that is Russell Moore's publication now, in 2015 wrote this article titled, What You Probably Don't Know About the Least of These. It says, who else in Matthew went hungry, thirsty, homeless, naked, sick, and imprisoned? We find such a group in Matthew 10:1 through 42, where Jesus sends out the 12 disciples to preach about the kingdom. Parallels between Jesus' words in Matthew 10 and the description of the least of these in chapter 25 make it clear that Jesus is talking about his own people. In chapter 10, the disciples had no money, no bag for food or drink. They had no extra clothing. Jesus said they would often be arrested. And so within the context of the entire book of Matthew, we actually see that Jesus is talking about his children that are being sent out on his behalf. So Christianity Today says, also recurring is the idea that one's response to Jesus's representatives is a response to Jesus himself. Whoever receives you receives me, and whoever receives me receives him who sent me. Russell Moore better watch out. Got a bunch of Nazis at Christianity Today. We've also got Kevin DeYoung. He is a professor at Reformed Theological Seminary in Charlotte, and he wrote an article for the Gospel Coalition in 2017 titled, who are the least of these. He says the least of these refers to other believers in need, specifically itinerant Christian teachers dependent on other Christians for hospitality and support. And he gives his supporting points. We won't go through all of these in detail. We can link the article. You can read it for yourself. But he says in verse 45, Jesus uses the phrase the least of these, but in verse 40, he uses a more exact phrase, the least of these, my brothers. The reference to my brothers can't be a reference to all of suffering humanity. Brother is never used this way in the New Testament. He's talking either about his physical brothers, which we know that he's not because that wouldn't make sense in context, or he's talking about his spiritual brethren, which in context it seems that he is. Likewise, it makes more sense to think Jesus is comparing service to fellow believers with service to him, rather than to hear him saying, you should see my image in the faces of the poor, as some people have asserted. Also, he says the word least is the superlative form of mikroi, little ones, and mikroi always refers to the disciples in Matthew's gospel. Also, Denny Burke, he wrote in 2015, the least of these are not the poor, but the Christian baker, photographer, and florist. He also is a professor at Boyce College. And he wrote this, the Bible teaches about our obligation to the poor, but contrary to popular belief, the least of these in Matthew 25:40 is not talking generically about our obligation to care for the poor and the needy. In short, how you treat Jesus' disciples reveals how you treat Jesus. How you have received Jesus' messengers shows how you have received Jesus' message. Your works will reveal whether you have believed the gospel or not, and your works will bear witness either for you or against you at the judgment. It's about this verse, any disciple of Jesus who was ever mistreated in the name of Jesus. This text shows us that Jesus will judge those who show contempt for the gospel by mistreating gospel bearers. Yes, that means Jack Phillips is the least of these, more accurately than the world's poor. Again, that doesn't mean we shouldn't care for the world's poor, but we should read verses rightly. We should look at the original language. We should look at the context. Even if Russell Moore, the editor-in-chief of Christianity Today, calls you a Nazi for doing so. All right, we've got so much to get into today. I want to talk, everyone has been asking me to respond to this Jesus is Lord controversy at the Kamala rally. I might have an opinion that surprises you. There's a reason why I haven't commented on it. I'm not just trying to be contrarian to what most Christian conservative commentators have said. These are just my true organic thoughts. Maybe they might make some of you mad. I'm not sure. That's not my purpose. But I have a little bit of a different take. Before we get into it, I just want to remind you that my book, Toxic Empathy, is for sale. You can go to toxicempathy.com, or you can go to the link in the description of this episode. It is on Amazon. That's the easiest place to buy it. If you're like me and in this season of life, you're listening to books, it is also available on Audible. It is me reading it. I got this awesome message from one of you on Instagram, and I thought that I had it in front of me, but I don't, but it was really sweet. And you said that after reading this book, you have already changed 3 people's minds on the subjects that we covered. So abortion, gender, the definition of marriage, sexuality, immigration, social justice. Another one of you messaged me and said that you have been able to have really fruitful conversations with your parents who have been very anti-conservative positions on a lot of these things, and how they were really able to engage you with some of the things that you told them because of this book. All glory to God. That's exactly what I wanted. If you want to be equipped to have the conversations with these tens of millions of Christians who are politically disengaged or who just listen to the left-wing propaganda that is constantly coming at us from every direction, then you need to get the book Toxic Empathy. Again, you can get it on Amazon. You can get it wherever books are sold. I think if you want to get it in person, you can also go to Hobby Lobby. It should be available there. All right, I might as well stop for another ad before we get into the Jesus is Lord story, and that is crowd health. Crowd Health is a great alternative to health insurance. I don't have to tell you how complicated and what a struggle health insurance can be. You feel like you don't have health insurance, even when you do. It's so expensive. It seems like the prices are rising, so it might be time for you to opt out. Stop sending money to big insurance companies who profit off of not paying your bills, and check out Crowd Health. For $175 for an individual or $575 for a family of 4 or more, you get access to a community of people who are willing to help out in the event of an emergency. You get access to telemedicine visits, discounted prescriptions, so much more without doctors' networks getting in the way. And of course, you join the crowd, a group of members just like you who want to help pay for each other's unexpected medical events. Go to joincrowdhealth.com/Allie. When you use my link, you get it for just $99 a month for your first 3 months. Crowd Health is not insurance. Learn more at joincrowdhealth.com. That's joincrowdhealth.com/Allie. Okay, last week at a Kamala Harris rally that was held at the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse, a pair of Christian students were heckled and mocked by Harris herself when they shouted, "Jesus is Lord," following Harris's statements about abortion. So Harris, as we've talked about before, she gets very animated and excited and charismatic when she's talking about abortion because it is the thing that she loves most. And you might think that's an exaggeration. It is not. If you simply look at the facts surrounding her career, what her political history has been, she loves abortion. She has never voted on any restriction for abortion, any regulation that would help babies who have survived abortion. Her and her running mate, Tim Walz, have that in common. And so she's getting very animated and excited, talking about the thing that she loves and worships, which is abortion. And so these students respond by saying Jesus is Lord. And here is how Harris reacts. Shot 1.
With the intention that they would undo the protections of Roe v. Wade, and they did as he intended. Oh, you guys are at the wrong rally. No, I think you meant to go to the smaller one down the street.
Okay, so here's a little bit more clear audio if you didn't hear that fully. There's a full shot of the crowd on this one. Shot 2.
As he intended.
Okay, Christ is King, Jesus is Lord. This is Grant, Beth, and Luke Pulaski, both juniors at the school. And of course, they attended it to kind of agitate their, he was on Fox and Friends weekend, and one of them was Luke Pulaski, told Fox and Friends Harris was 100% talking to them. She was actually waving at me. And so I understand why this has created the anger that it has and the outrage that it has. And I don't disagree with my Christian conservative friends when they say, look at who Kamala Harris is, that if someone declares that Jesus is Lord, that she is going to say, you don't belong here. I think Democrats have made that very clear. I also 100% agree that the Democrat platform is absolutely demonic and that she wants nothing to do with real Christian values. That is 100% true. However, I think we know that Christ is King, as true as it is, has also been used as a form of political agitation. It's become a motto by some people on X who don't actually believe or live as if Christ is King, but think that saying that is somehow sticking it to their political or cultural opponents. Am I saying you shouldn't say it? Of course not. I'm not saying it. But just like in everything we say, our motive matters, right? Jesus himself said, many of you will say, Lord, Lord, yet I will say, depart from me, for I never knew you. And so even saying the right things, even saying true things, the context matters, the motive matters. And I'm not impugning the motives of these two young people. Maybe they were there to really share the gospel and declare the truth of the Lord, and more power to them. if that is the case. What I am kind of defending, have I ever defended Kamala Harris? I don't know. I am not one to really give her the benefit of the doubt. However, if she understands that in some cases, this Christ is King language has been used as a form of political agitation, she might have realized or recognized or thought that that is what these students are doing, that they are just trying to interrupt her speech, that they're just trying to agitate and annoy and distract the people that are there to listen to her. She probably wasn't saying, although I do think this is what she really thinks, but in that moment, I don't think that she was saying that if you believe Jesus is Lord, you don't belong at this rally. I know, hell hath frozen over. For some reason, I am defending Kamala Harris, which, again, is not really something that I want to do, but I don't know. I was just conflicted as I was seeing the reaction to this because, as we talked about in our Christ is King episode, which we can link in this description several months ago, Christ is King, while it is absolutely true, it is much bigger and better and deeper than some kind of political mantra or catchy motto. I mean, it is the most controversial statement that has ever existed because God's authority means something. If he created all things, then he is the authority over all things. He gets to define all things. He gets to judge all people. He gets to set the standard. He gets to be the truth, the way, the life. No one gets to come to the Father except through him. Like, there are heavy, eternal, profound implications of that statement. It is not just a cudgel. Like, it's not just something that we use to swat at our political opponent. So if it is not something that is, which I'm not, again, talking about these two students. I hope and believe that they are 100% true Christians and just went there to preach the gospel. But in general, I'm saying I understand why she reacted the way that she did, because there are some people who do not live and believe as if Christ is King who do use that. I mean, during that whole controversy a few months ago, you literally had Muslims. I think Andrew Tate was out there saying Christ is King. So, yeah, Christ is King, Andrew Tate, and one day you're going to wish he wasn't. So I think we just need to be really careful about like how we are using Jesus's name, what we are using it for. There is such a thing as taking the Lord's name in vain, and it is not just saying, oh my God. Some people out there even get mad when I say OMG. Get your mind out of the gutter. It stands for oh my goodness, okay? That's just an aside. But I do think using Jesus's name as just a form of agitation or a motto is wrong. Don't know if these students were doing that, but I understand Kamala Harris's reaction, and I don't think that it is the best. I don't think it is the best example of how she is anti-Christian. She is anti-Christian. Look at her platform. It is anti-Bible, anti-God, 100%. This is just not a good example. This is like a non-controversy to me. Now, I will say, J.D. Vance did respond to this, however, just like on a surface level, way better than Kamala Harris did. Here's that.
I don't think that we've, that's right, Jesus is King, and I don't think that we've seen... I don't think that we've seen anything like this in modern American politics.
Kamala Harris did go to a few churches, however, and she tried very hard. She tried very hard to make it seem like she is, I was going to say one of us, but this is a brand and a sect of Christianity that I don't relate to and have no affiliation with whatsoever. So I would say one of them. She tried to use the language of Christians within the Black church to bring the souls to the polls. Souls to the polls is a movement that has existed within the Black church, a mobilization effort led by National Advisory Board of Black Faith Leaders for a very long time. Democrat politicians go into these Black churches, And they say, vote for me. And they use Christian sounding language to justify that. Now, interestingly, the people who are very scared of Christian nationalism, the David French, the Tim Alberta, the Russell Moores of the world, all the progressive professing Christians, they have no problem with this. This is not scary. This is not The Handmaid's Tale. This is not theocracy. This is not wedding empire with state. This is not, or with church. This is not threatening the separation of church and state, which is very telling. The only people that progressives do not want to bring their whole worldview into the public sphere is conservative Christians. Everyone else can do it. Everyone else can use their beliefs to inform their vote, to inform what they think about these public issues, except for Christian conservatives. When Christian conservatives do it, it's Christian nationalism, which is, of course, a manipulation tactic to get you to be silent and to get you to try to compartmentalize your faith and ultimately vote Democrat. So Kamala Harris went to New Birth Missionary Baptist Church, and we'll play her sermon in just a second. Let me pause and tell you about our next sponsor. It's Jase Medical. You never know what's going to happen after this election with the supply chain, when we'll have another calamity like COVID, if a horrible weather event will hit you where you live. You want to be able to get access to the medications that you need to survive. You want access to the most common antibiotics to save you from a potentially life-threatening infection. You can even add on to these antibiotics through Jase Medical in their Jase case, things like ivermectin or an EpiPen. Get a Jase Daily case that is a year-long supply of the prescriptions that you and your family rely on. It is so much better to be safe than sorry. Those who have suffered through these hurricanes over the past few weeks can tell you that these can really be lifesavers. Go to jase.com/Allie. Use code Allie at checkout for a discount on your order. That's jase.com, code Allie. Okay, here she was on Sunday. Actually, this is not her sermon yet. I got to show you her worshiping in church at New Birth Missionary Baptist Church in Atlanta. Sot 3. Okay, so that woman is super talented, and so that's great for her. But why Kamala Harris is being welcomed into a church when she stands against everything, her platform, her policy, I'm not even just talking about her personally, stands against everything that Christians should stand for, I'm just not sure, except for just a blind allegiance to the Democrat Party. Of course, I don't think Donald Trump is a representative of Christianity. I'm not sure that either of them are Christians. But again, when we're looking at the policies that will affect your life, that affect babies' lives, that affect the lives of the most vulnerable, we've got one candidate that is a candidate of lawlessness and disorder, and that is Kamala Harris. That's what her policies represent. Pastor Jamal Bryant, he is also notorious for his own personal infidelities. He was in an open marriage, it was reported, he said himself, in 2012. In 2014, he said this in a sermon. He said, "Every brother, would you tap another brother and say, I should have listened to her. God help me. All saints here forgive me, but I got to tell you, these hoes ain't loyal." Just as Jesus said. In 2016, a then 34-year-old California woman alleged that Bryant fathered a son with her a year earlier after encouraging her to have an abortion when he first discovered she was pregnant. So that's who is leading this church that is welcoming Kamala Harris in. Like attracts like. It makes a lot of sense. Bryant preached from Esther 4:14, pushed the conspiracy theory that the Heritage Foundation that their Project 2025 is a plot to destroy minority communities, similar to Haman's plot to destroy the Jews. Okay. That is also, I would just say within that is an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory that we hear a lot among Black supremacists and the Black Hebrew Israelites, that they are the real Jews. And so you'll see even in James Cone in his liberation theology, which is completely heretical, it's not Christian in any way, that they will often, these liberation theologians will often compare Black people to Israel and say that they're basically the same thing, that their plight is parallel. It's just an interesting part of what I see of a lot of like Black liberal theology. Bryant then suggested that Harris was called by God to lead for such a time as this and urged Black men to support her. You'll remember from last week that Black men are having a hard time supporting Kamala Harris. Here's Top 4.
Can I just preach to the vice president? Who knew that 60 years ago today, you were born to be president? You were born to lead a nation. You were born to change the trajectory of democracy. Who knows? But you were born for such a time as this.
So awkward. So weird. Okay. Here's his prayer for Kamala Harris, Top 5.
I pray that you'll assign 100,000 angels to cover her head. Thank you, dear Lord, that you have given her this moment to defy the odds in front of the entire world.
Okay. Tell me one thing that Kamala Harris represents for you in that church besides skin color. Besides the fact that she's a woman. Like, what is it? What's the policy? Like, you understood that she used disproportionately Black men in the state of California as cheap labor. That even when she was urged to let some people out of prison, she wouldn't, because they were used for cheap labor in the state of California. I mean, she could have used the millions of illegal immigrants there that she allowed in through her support of sanctuary city policies for that cheap labor, but she chose to use prisoners that could have been let out of jail when California was dealing with a prison crowdedness problem. So even from like a more progressive perspective, I'm just not sure like what she brings to the table, again, besides abortion. What is it? It's not her economic policy. It's not her foreign policy. It's certainly not her justice policy. She also gave a message. She said, "Joy cometh in the morning." Here's Thought 6.
When we come across our brothers and sisters in need, let us, as the Good Samaritan did, see in the face of a stranger a neighbor. And let us recognize that when we shine the light in moments of darkness, it will guide our feet into the path of peace. And let us remember that while weeping may endure for a night, joy cometh in the morning.
Okay, that's unironically better exegesis than Russell Moore. Honestly, like the Good Samaritan is actually a good story to point to if you want to say that Christians are called to help the other, to help the poor, to help those that society says are undervalued. She actually had better theology in that clip than Russell Moore. But of course, all of this is used to say, vote Democrat. Look, Jesus's command to care for the Samaritan, to care for the vulnerable, the actual poor, to heal the sick, the early church in Acts, all of these are commands for the Christian. They are not commands for the state. You don't get to outsource your obedience to God and your care for the vulnerable to the state, which is never giving freely, by the way. Again, you will be placed in jail if you don't pay your taxes. That's not charity. That's not generosity. There is a place for taxes. There is a place for the government. The government is instituted by God to reward good, to punish evil. That's Romans 13. And another reason why I could never vote for Kamala Harris, because she believes in doing the opposite. She believes in jailing pro-lifers and rewarding abortionists. So I could never support someone who believes in turning and who believes that evil is good and good is evil in her policy and what she's actually enacted as a politician. And so it's just hogwash. It's just hogwash that we could vote for the Democrat Party in the name of caring for the poor. And Virgil Walker said this. I thought this was a good commentary on this whole thing. He said, if your pastor is preaching the virtues of Kamala Harris and her policies, you're not at a church. You're at an outpost of the Democratic National Convention. These men are not shepherding souls. They are leading them into spiritual destruction. Like, tell me how these pastors that do something like this, how are they any different than the tax collectors? Isn't that basically what they are for the Democrat Party? They're just tax collectors of the powerful regime. Yet they will say that they are working on behalf of the most vulnerable and the marginalized. It's the exact opposite. Like, this is actually the scary Christian nationalism, the scary empire that we should be looking at. Using Christianity to justify supporting demonic progressive ideology that seeks power at any cost and punishes people like Jack Phillips for standing up for what is good, right, and true. But of course, Christian conservative, you are being manipulated into silence by this Christian nationalist moniker. So just ignore it and fully and confidently bring your entire worldview into the public sphere because God's ways are better. All right. Last sponsor for the day is NetSuite. If you are a business owner, you need to listen up. Over 38,000 businesses have future-proofed their business with NetSuite by Oracle, the #1 cloud ERP, bringing accounting, financial management, inventory, HR into one fluid platform with one unified business management suite. There's one source of truth giving you the visibility and control you need to make quick decisions with real-time insights and forecasting. You're peering into the future with actionable data. When you're closing the books in days, not weeks, you're spending less time looking backward and more time on what's next. Whether your company is earning millions or even hundreds of millions, NetSuite helps you respond to immediate challenges and seize your biggest opportunities. Go to netsuite.com/Allie for a free guide called the CFO's Guide to AI and Machine Learning at netsuite.com/Allie. All right, one last announcement. I will be giving commentary on election night all night. It's going to be really fun. I think it starts at 6 p.m. Eastern time and then ends, I don't know, maybe 11, maybe 1 a.m. I'm not sure. It's going to be a fun night. I never sit and do commentary for that long, but because it's election night, because I want to be plugged in, because I want to be engaging with you guys, talking with you guys, sharing my thoughts, I will be Blaze TV giving commentary all night. It'll be on YouTube. It'll be on Blaze TV. So check it out there. All right. I'll see you guys tomorrow.